Okay, so this is a video about the Adventure Country Tracks UK route, which is a pretty new route. If anybody's not aware of it, it's part of a grander Adventure Country Tracks initiative, which is a partnership, seems to be by Touratech and a few other big adventure motorcycling outlets. And the idea is to put together a series of rideable tracks for larger adventure bikes around Europe. So there's, I think there's one in Greece and Portugal, Pyrenees, etc. And the UK is the latest edition. I think it's tricky with the UK because we don't have sort of those long gravel tracks that they have in other parts of Europe. So I think it's always going to be a slightly different proposition for the UK. And the aim of this video is just to do a bit of a download on the trip that I did last week with 10 riders. So I guide tours, and as soon as I saw the Adventure Country Tracks come up, I thought that looks a really good way of getting some of my normal customers out and about on their motorbikes. Typically I get people on smaller bikes, sort of Himalayan, CRF 300s, those type of bikes, and it just seemed like just a great opportunity to put a trip together. So 10 riders. I had a backup van driven by mate Rich, and we did it over the 5 days, which is what they sort of prescribe it to take to do this. I guess it's about a 600-mile trip, starting in the Brecon Beacons, going up through Wales to Snowdonia, across from Liverpool to Douglas on the Isle of Man, doing a lap of the Isle of Man, doing some tracks on there, back to Heysham, and then Heysham across to Whitby. So yeah, about 600 miles, give or take. On the website, the Adventure Country Tracks website, they list it as intermediate to expert. So I think that suggests maybe what's in store. I think the perception from the riders I got was that it's going to be quite a manageable route. Most of the riders were self-declared semi-novice trail riders. You know, they'd done a bit. They might have done a bit 10 years ago. They might have been to an off-road training school last year, but they weren't regular off-road riders. And I guess what maybe attracted them to the ACT rather than the TEP was the manageability of it. So I guess us doing it early doors is maybe a good way for us to communicate how we got on. The bikes, well, I took this CT125. I wanted a light, manageable bike that I could sort of shepherd the pack up, because I knew people would fall off. I knew I'd have to go back and pick people up, so I wanted the lightest, most manageable bike. I got on my fleet, and I've got these for people to ride, take them out and guide a tour. So I just, took this one. Just great bikes. The original 110 was an incredible bike. The 125 is a little bit bigger, but still, not big compared to what the Adventure Country Tracks are sort of offering in terms of a GS size suitability, track suitability. The other bikes on the trip, so I had another one of these. Richard was on another one of those. I had Matt on a monkey bike. I had Dom on a Transalp 650. I had the other Dom on a Scram. I had Philip on a CRF 300, Malcolm on a 250, and David on a Zontes 350 Adventure. I think there's another bike or so that I missed there, but they were all sort of sub 500. Another David on a CB500X. CB500X was the biggest bike on this trip. So, look at, if you're in the CB500X or lower category, maybe this video's for you. We started by meeting in Brecon Beacons. There's a YHA there that worked out about 20 quid a night. So it's a perfect starting point. Gives you a base, gives you a roof over your head. Obviously you could do it in a hotel format or however, camping. But for getting a group together, I thought YHA was good. There are options a little bit closer to England rather than further into Wales, like Brecon Beacons YHA is a bit further out west than you need to get on the start of the track. So maybe look at, say, Leominster. Dom's bike stop, he does camping, so that could be a good place to start your route there. And we gathered there and we got 5 days. I think it's fair to say that it was a trickier start than we thought. The first track in particular was damning. I'm going to be honest. I ride quite a fair bit on all sorts of bikes. I've owned GS 1200s and stuff like that. And I got my group and we come around this corner. You go around this farmhouse and you look up this lane, and it's just like boulders, baby head boulders, all the way up to a gate. Fairly steep, but really, you could tell it was going to be loose and a bit of a challenge. And I immediately thought, we're in a bit of trouble here, because I knew from what the guys had described about their riding, they were going to struggle. And they did. We had a KTM 690 Adventure, that went down first. I think something else went down, and then the Zontes 350 went down as well. So we had quite a few bikes down on that first lane. So I'm going to come on to bike choice, but I think for me, I think the image of the adventure country tracks is about big bikes, panniers and that, doing these recreational routes around Europe. That first lane is a green lane. It's a trail, not a track. It's tricky, you know. It's one of them you've really got to focus and got to be good at. And if you're carrying luggage, which we weren't, all our luggage went in the van, so we were already travelling lighter than most people, other people would. But if you've, you know, bought your GS12, your Pan America, your Africa Twin, your Bid Today Thoughts Weekend off-road training, or Saipavia, or the one that does the Harley Davidsons and stuff. If you'd had a bit of training, but then you bought your metal panniers, and you'd seen the image of adventure country tracks and what it envisaged, and came around that corner, I think you'd be terrified. And I think the bikes would be going down. And I think on the promotional video or in the documentary that the guys from the ACT produced, they said it took 2 hours to get up that. And I can imagine it would. I mean, we had to help. I was sort of ferrying people up and riding bikes. I had to ride David Zontes up and gallop another bike up. So if you're going into this thinking it's going to be easy, it's not easy. The first track is a make or break lane, and actually David on the Zontes didn't ride on beyond that. I put him on the CT 125 to get him to the top. He did a few more lanes, and then after that, it damaged his knee. He was done, and that was on a Zontes 350. And he got a little bit of experience, not a lot. So if you're coming into this with that sort of same little bit of experience, and on a GS12, which weighs with luggage another 100 kilos over that Zontes, you know, and you're either on your own or in a pair, I think you're going to have trouble. I don't think it's a great lane to start the track with if you're trying to get people to build confidence. If I was putting a route together and I was guiding it, it's certainly not a trail I would put at the first doors, because I know what it'd do. It'd destroy people, destroy their confidence. Having said that, when they got to the top, people thought, bloody hell, we've done it. You know, there was a euphoria, and that maybe made people think, right, this is going to be tougher than I expected it to, but I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to do it. So it could go both ways. I think these guys with me benefited because they were on smaller bikes, they didn't have no luggage and they had people to pick them up. If you're on a bigger bike with luggage with nobody to pick you up, that first lane might be the way you call it quits. Which is a shame, because the rest of the day through to the first stop in McKinley, or we stayed in Dolgethly, that's a fantastic ride. The rest of that first lane is good, and then the rest of the lanes flow really nicely through mid Wales. Some really long, nice, easy tracks. Just really remote, beautiful scenery, short stretches of tarmac. You know, that is what I would imagine as venture country tracks. And I think everyone sort of came into it then. We had a bit of deep water. The Zontes actually went down again, and that's when a bit more damage to the knee was done. And that was a heavy bike to lift. That's a 200 kilo bike down flat in water. Two guys trying to lift it, really struggling. So, yeah, that if it gives you a sort of a gauge of what you might want to attempt it on based around your ability. If you're a good rider on a big bike, you'll be fine. If you're a poor rider on a big bike, get a small bike because you'll struggle. We got to McKinley, good weather. We couldn't believe the weather. You know, weather forecasts were terrible. We got good weather. Everyone had hunkered down and got through it. David, unfortunately, went off on the Zontes because he'd hurt himself. One down. We stayed, and I'll put a link in the video, great little campsite just outside Dolgethly, cabins and things. It was like £75 for a cabin with 6 bunks in it, so that's a really good, cheap way of doing it. McKinley didn't have many campsites or bunkhouses, so we pushed on to Dolgethly and had to reroute. In terms of that second day, this is probably the worst riding day. You do Bomber Lane, which is a long lane looking over Barmouth, so it's a beautifully scenic track and quite manageable. It's a bit rough on the southwesterly side. It's a bit chopped up. But we did that track in the morning. Great stuff. The second lane had been updated to direct it away from what had originally taken you down an illegal byway or a non-boat. So the original route that you could download was wrong. And they were emailing people who got the route to update them. And I was told by the guy who coordinates it that they were trying to get the route updated by Germany. And I think this is where something like this could really fall down or cause tension. I mean, trail riding is an unpopular thing at the best of times in some communities you pass through. And so to have a route online that you could download which takes you through an illegal stretch of road, which is not being updated as quick as it should be, is a bit of not a great thing. You know, let's be honest. If there's a farmer at the top of a field and everyone's ploughing through his private property and that don't change for 2 months while they update the mapping, that's not very good. So the guys really need to speed that up. The issue with doing it in 5 days meant that on the end of the day 2, we had to aim for the ferry to Liverpool, and the ferry sailed at 7:30 or so. So we were always in the back of our mind from about lunchtime, we have to get to Liverpool. Mated with that second lane, which had now been diluted to the point of not being that great, and then a few longer lanes, which were quite kind of tame, that took us towards, I guess, Cheshire and things like that, towards the ferry. That second day was probably not the greatest of days riding. It was still a good day, but not as good as the first day. And now what I would do is increase the length of time of the trip to 6 days and make that second day, instead of being on the ferry, I would make it so that you arrive near the ferry, but but you're still on the mainland, still in England, and you could therefore maybe do more tracks around Dolgethly or wherever. Because the reality of the ACT is it carves a path, but it obviously has to miss a lot of other tracks nearby in close proximity in order to get to where it wants to take you. So you could spend more time getting the TRS green road map and add in extra lanes, and then spend the entire second day getting to the ferry but not getting on it, and therefore to give you a bit of breath. And then what we did, we were in the Isle of Man. That's the evening of the second night. You could get the ferry the next morning and have maybe half a day just to ride around the island before having the next full day to ride and then come home. Instead, we got there on the end of the second day. We got up early. We didn't get in until 10 o'clock at night. We got up early on the third day, and we did our loop of Isle of Man. One thing to be aware of, there's lots of road closures always happening on the Isle of Man for bike testing and resurfacing. So some of the route we couldn't get onto. The first lane, second lane we did was a tough lane. Again, a tough lane. Took you sort of boggy, rutted, wet, climbing. Good lane. Like if you can ride, you look at that and go, good lane. Obviously, we had some guys who struggled. Poor David on the CB 500X, I think he went down 5-6 times getting down to the end of that lane. We got to the end of that lane and the road was closed. We had to come back. It's one of those sort of moments where you just think things aren't going well today. But he kept getting up. And I think if anybody's in that place of, I want to get into it, I've done a bit, how do I keep going? He's a great case in point. You just keep going. You keep getting back up. You keep getting back on the bike, and you keep trying again. I think if you get disheartened or disillusioned, and you're that type of person who easily does, that might be the end of your trail riding career. As it was, David just sixth time picking him up. He still got on it with enthusiasm to give it a go. On the way back, I did put him on a CT, and I rode the 500X, and that's where, for me, again, I ride a bit. I had a 500X with a Rally Raid kit, just as David had. That bike was heavy. It was top heavy. It was always wanting to topple. You had to have great precision and balance to get that bike down some of them lanes. So the 500X was too big a bike. So how the guys are going to go on with the GS12s, the Tenerés, the Africa Twins, whatever you can have, let's have a think, Explorers, Multistraders going down there with panniers, it's going to be a disaster. So if you're a great rider, get crack on. If you're not, I've got to stress, go smaller. CRF 300s managed easily. The Scram managed easy. The Transalp actually did really well. I think the weighting of that bike, it's probably not much lighter than a 500X, but the engine seems to sit a bit lower. Therefore, it's far better balanced, 21-inch front wheel. The 500X was struggling. The Transalp was almost in its element along there. The rest of the Isle of Man, it's just great riding over there, but I had to keep higgledy-piggledy in a route to get us to the lanes, missing out the road closures and stuff like that. So not an ideal day, but some really good lanes over there. And the Isle of Man is a beautiful place. The people are incredibly friendly and warming towards motorcyclists and trail riders. The horse riders were enthusiastic to see us. They weren't terrified. The horses were well trained to deal with motorcycles. And the cafe owners were just delighted to see you and to take, just to welcome you into their cafes, which is not always what we get in the UK. So Isle of Man, yes, it was £130 for a ferry, but if you want to experience another way of life, a warmer way of life, get to the Isle of Man and just have a weekend away, because I think it's a spectacular island. And I'm not saying it's ruined by race weekend, but for me the best time to go is when it's quiet, not when it's packed full of sports bikes. Nothing against sports bikes, but you've got the island to yourself when it's off season, and that's how I kind of prefer it. So we got the early 8:30 ferry on the Thursday morning, and that put us into Haitian. And from then we had the coast to coast across to Whitby over like the rest of that day, and then the next day, so a day and a half to do the coast to coast. I've got to say that fourth day, that afternoon on, after we got off at Haitian, we started going east and we started doing those long lanes, about 3 long lanes. And the weather and the dynamic of the group had really evolved to make that probably one of my favourite, most memorable days ever on a motorcycle. And, you know, I've been around the world. I've ridden Iceland, America, you know, Europe, Australia. I've done lots and lots of riding in lots and lots of circumstances on lots of different bikes. But I've never had a moment where 10 guys were in a dynamic flow so that over about an 8-mile lane or whatever it turned out to be, through dramatic Yorkshire Dale scenery when no one else was about, on tracks that were fun but not overly challenging or overly easy, we just got into such a flow and a dynamic where it was spaced out, but somebody would open a gate and wait for everyone to come through, and then the next person would wait. And it just developed a really organic movement. And with the weather and just the relaxation, and we weren't riding fast, I think we were really able to soak in what trail riding or what motorcycling really should be about. And that isn't about performance and fast and speed and suspension travel and everything else that we always get caught up in. It's just about enjoying being out there, and in this case with a great group of people who were just enthralled to be doing it. They admitted they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't have done it on their own. So you could say, you know, why would somebody pay to go on it? Well, because they wouldn't have done it otherwise. Because there's lots of people out there who don't have the confidence to go off on the road for 5-6 days doing trail riding. They don't know what to do if they get a puncture or break down or turn ill or whatever, or plan a route or navigate. So these guys, who probably wouldn't have been there otherwise, but had found themselves together, we just shared an incredible memory. And I think England as well, to see England from those back roads, those old stone walls of England, and I think that's what for me made me feel quite proud of England as a place, as a country, Great Britain as a nation. Just how solid, how historic, how grand, how fortified it feels when you get off the beaten track and get into those little communities, which are just tucked away in mountain passes and down little lanes. You know, that's where, I guess for me, you find England. That's almost like the source of the river, for me anyway, in a kind of a non-tub-thumping, jingoistic, patriotic kind of way, but just a reconnect with the backbone of Britain. And that was one of the most enchanting things for me. As I rode along, I thought, I cannot believe we had the devotion to build this many brick walls. I mean, literally miles of dry stone walls, which you think, just to keep some sheep in, just to create a basic industry centuries ago. And you think, we were great. We were a great nation, and it made me feel quite proud, actually quite patriotic, and I don't feel any shame in saying that, because we are a great country. We've got great places to see and things to do and people in it. So I think if you're looking to reconnect with your own homeland, or if you're from overseas, you want to see a bit of real England, or I don't know, traditional England, let's call it. I think the Adventure Country Tracks has done a great thing of connecting people with that. So that for me was for many reasons, that was one of my best riding days. The scenery, the people, the amphitheatre of going through this place with this group and seeing these sights. It was memorable, completely memorable. And then we stayed in Hawes on a great little campsite just north of Hawes. Then went into town for an Indian, curry, and it's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, people saying, well, how can, patriotic England, it makes it almost sound like you're talking in racial terms, and then you're going for an Indian curry in Hawes. But I guess that's it, isn't it? That old dry stone walls and then Indian curries, that's England. And I kind of really I just really enjoyed everything about that day. And the next day, we got up, and it was foggy. We were aiming for Whitby, and I think we'd all realised we'd had the best day's riding we could ever have, and therefore we were just going to get to Whitby and see what we could see. And that day's riding was okay. We did the really long lane out towards over the Yorkshire moors, and then we stayed in a bunkhouse that evening, Killsdale bunkhouse, which is a really good place, just about 20 miles back from Whitby. And then we rode into Whitby for fish and chips that night, and came back at night in deep fog, which was another sort of, interesting dynamic to the trip. So that kind of was our Adventure Country Tracks. It was an adventure. It was unplanned. Well, it was we had a route, we had a backup van, but what happens in between is totally unpredictable and totally impossible to control. I just know that I think we all had a great ride. We all had a great experience it was hard work. It was hard graft being the shepherd of that group because I had a lot of picking up to do and a lot of faffing to do. But if I was riding it on my own or with a few group of people, that route would really be a great way of seeing England. So yeah, highly recommended. I don't think it's for big adventure bikes. I've got to be honest. I think the age of the adventure bike and this marketing push for them to be seen as travel trail bikes is just, it's gone beyond the pale really. Like, a 300 kilo bike does not belong on a trail on your own or in a pairs in a remote condition, in remote terrain. It's just ridiculous that that image is being pushed. I used to be involved in it. I used to edit Adventure Bike Rider magazine, which was all about big adventure bikes. I used to own a GS12. I used to trail ride that. I used to love trail riding that. But since then, I've seen sense. And, you know, what do you want to explore places that are outside your comfort zone? You need a bike that is friendly, that is easy to ride, that is easy to pick up, that is non-intimidating, which is just your friend rather than your foe. And I think the problem with those big bikes is that as soon as it gets tricky, they turn against you. They do nothing to help you as a rider, as a novice, as somebody who's struggling. And they become doubly heavy as soon as they sort of get on a lead, and you're in big trouble. So I get what they're trying to do here with the adventure country tracks to try to get big adventure riders out trailing, and maybe that works lovely in the Pyrenees and Greece where they've got lots of gravel track. But in Britain, could I honestly recommend a semi-novice rider heading out on a big bike and doing this? No. Get a CRF, get a Scram, get a Transalp, get a CT125, get a monkey bike, get anything but a 1200, 1250 GS or something like that. So that's kind of my download on adventure country tracks. We had a great trip, and the bike needs a good clean. The bike, absolutely no problems with it whatsoever. So Honda, you still miss the biggest trick ever, because this bike, this democratizes, I think that's the right word, democratizes adventure. You could put a complete novice on this bike and you could do the adventure country tracks. Tomorrow I'm taking a group out on these and the old 110s. I've got a 72-year-old coming who's about 4'6". We're going to go do some trail riding. She's never been off-road trail riding before, but I'm going to take a trail riding on a CT110. Could you do that on any other bike? No. So if you're of a mature age with a limited amount of skill, take no notice of the marketeers who are going to sell you a 15 grand bike that weighs 200 kilos. Get something small and go off and explore. That's it. Right, cheers, bye.